Look at a 1914 gold sovereign. It is heavy, it is eternal, and it feels undeniably real. When you hold it, you aren't just holding currency. You are holding a physical piece of a world that thought it would last forever. In July 1914, London was the center of the universe. The British Empire spanned the globe, and at its heart sat the pound sterling. But the pound wasn't just money. It was a sacred promise. You could walk into a bank, hand them a crisp piece of paper, and by law, they had to give you gold. No questions asked. This was the gold standard. A system where every banknote was simply a receipt for a physical treasure locked in a vault. It was a world of absolute certainty. But that certainty was an illusion. On June 28th, a single assassination in Sarajevo triggered a geopolitical chain reaction that no one could stop. As the great powers of Europe mobilized, a terrifying reality set in. War was coming. And war is the most expensive thing humans have ever invented. In July 1914, Britain was the world's bank. Every pound note was legally a receipt for a physical piece of gold. Then, World War I broke out. If everyone tried to get their gold at once, the country would vanish. The secret that the bankers had kept for decades, that there was never actually enough gold to go around, was about to be exposed. The global economy was a trust machine, a delicate engine fueled by the belief that the gold would always be there. But as the drums of war grew louder, that trust began to evaporate. We are about to watch that machine break in real time. This is the story of the day the gold died. Chapter 1. How the world actually worked. To understand how the world broke in 1914, you first have to understand how it was held together. For nearly a century, the global economy had been operating on a system so stable, so predictable, that people treated it like a law of nature. We call it the gold standard, but you can think of it as the world's most sophisticated coat check. Imagine you go to a high-end theater. You hand over your heavy winter coat at the door, and in exchange, the attendant hands you a small, numbered slip of paper. That paper has no intrinsic value. You can't wear it to stay warm. You can't eat it. But as long as you hold that slip, you are relaxed. Why? Because you know, with 100% certainty, that you can walk back to that desk at any time, hand over the paper, and get your coat back. In this analogy, the coat is gold, and the paper slip is the British pound sterling. In 1914, a £5 note was not just money in the way we think of it today. It was a legal claim. It was a receipt for roughly 1.2 ounces of pure gold sitting in a vault at the Bank of England. This wasn't a suggestion. It was the law. If you walked into the bank, the teller was legally obligated to settle the debt in specie, physical gold coins. This coat check system created a level of global trust that is almost impossible to imagine today, because the pound was tied to gold, and gold has the same value whether you are in London, Bombay, or Buenos Aires. The entire world agreed to use the pound as their universal currency. If a merchant in New York wanted to buy silk from Canton, they didn't haggle over exchange rates. They used British pounds, because they knew that at the end of the day, those pounds could be turned into gold in London. This transformed the City of London into the world's clearinghouse. It was the nerve center of the planet. Every major international transaction, every massive infrastructure loan, every shipment of wheat or coal eventually had its paperwork processed in the City of London. London was the trust machine that kept the gears of the 19th century turning. But here is where it gets interesting and a little bit absurd. Because the system was based on physical gold, the settling of accounts was a massive logistical undertaking. If Britain bought more from America than it sold, the balance had to be paid. This wasn't done with a digital wire transfer or a click of a button. It was done with heavy wooden crates. Steamships would pull into the London docks, and labourers would load hundreds of tons of gold bars into the hulls. These ships would then churn across the Atlantic, dodging storms and icebergs, just to deliver mountains of gold to New York. The entire world's wealth was physically sloshing back and forth across the oceans in a slow-motion ballet of bullion. However, beneath this heavy, golden stability, there was a hidden weakness, a secret that the elite bankers spoke about only in whispered tones. It was the fractional secret. You see, for the coat check system to be perfectly safe, you need one coat for every ticket. But the Bank of England was clever. They realized that in a world of peace and stability, not everyone comes to collect their coat at the same time. Most people are happy to just trade the tickets. So, the bank started issuing more tickets than they had coats. They lent out money they didn't technically have in the vault, betting that the trust machine would keep everyone from rushing the doors at once. It was a brilliant way to grow the economy, but it meant that the British Empire was built on a mathematical tightrope. As long as the world was calm, the system was genius. But if a moment ever came where everyone, every merchant in New York, every saver in London, every government in Europe demanded their gold at the exact same moment, the closets would be empty, the tickets would be worthless, and the trust machine would explode. In July 1914, that moment finally arrived. Chapter 2. The Panic of July. By the last week of July 1914, the trust machine wasn't just creaking, it was beginning to tear itself apart. To understand the speed of this collapse, you have to realize that in 1914, news traveled by telegraph, pulses of electricity hitting paper at the speed of light. But the actual money still moved at the speed of a steamship. The world's fear and panic was moving faster than its gold could keep up with. The timeline of the collapse reads like a countdown to an explosion. On July 27th, the continental stock exchanges in Vienna, Prague, and Brussels began to flicker and go dark. They simply shut down. The bankers there saw the writing on the wall. The July crisis, sparked by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was no longer a regional spat in the Balkans. It was a systemic failure. By the time the sun rose on July 31st, the unthinkable happened. The London Stock Exchange, the beating heart of global capitalism, a place that had remained open through the Napoleonic Wars and every colonial crisis for a century, bolted its doors. It was the first time in history the exchange had closed its doors due to fear and panic. Suddenly, the global web we talked about in Chapter 1 became a noose. Because London was the world's clearinghouse, every bank in the world owed money to London, and London owed money to everyone else. But with the stock market closed and war imminent, the flow of payments stopped dead. It was a global liquidity trap. If you were a merchant in London, you couldn't get the money owed to you from a buyer in Berlin because the borders were closing, but you still had to pay your own debts. Panic hit the streets, and it took a very specific physical form, the bank run. Imagine standing on Threadneedle Street, looking at the massive, windowless stone walls of the Bank of England. Usually this building represents the pinnacle of safety and security. But on July 31st, the atmosphere changed. Ordinary people, shopkeepers, clerks, retirees began to line up. They weren't there to make a deposit. They were holding £5 and £10 notes, and they wanted their coats. They wanted the gold. The fear was simple. If war breaks out, the government might seize the gold. If the Germans invade, the paper will be fire starters. The only thing that will hold its value when the world is on fire is the yellow, shiny metal. But as the lines grew, A more sinister force was at work behind the scenes, the vampire effect. It wasn't just nervous citizens draining the gold, it was foreign nations. Central banks in France, Germany, and Russia were desperately trying to shore up their own defenses. They began calling in every debt Britain owed them, demanding payment, not in credit, not in paper, but in physical bullion. They were sucking the gold out of the Bank of England's vaults as fast as the ships could carry it. The Bank of England was being bled dry from two sides. From the front door, the public was demanding sovereigns. From the back door, foreign powers were demanding bars. In a single week, the bank's gold reserves plummeted. The fractional secret was being exposed. The bank was legally required to keep a certain amount of gold to back its notes. And they were rapidly approaching the 0 point. By Friday evening, the situation was catastrophic. The bankers knew that when the banks opened again on Monday, the gold would be gone. Completely. The British Empire would be forced to admit it was broke. The promise of the last 100 years was about to be broken in front of a global audience. The weekend was coming, but for the men in charge of the British Treasury, it wouldn't be a holiday. It would be the most desperate 72 hours in the history of money. Chapter 3. The Longest Weekend. As the sun set on Friday, July 31st, 1914, the mood in Whitehall was apocalyptic. The streets outside were teeming with people caught in a fever of both patriotic fervor and financial terror. Inside the Treasury, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of old ink. The men gathered here: David Lloyd George, the charismatic Chancellor of the Exchequer, and a group of stony-faced bankers from the city, knew a truth the public didn't. Britain had roughly 48 hours before its financial system disintegrated. The problem was a simple matter of math and time. Monday, August 3rd, was a scheduled bank holiday. Normally, this was a day for the working class to take trains to the seaside. But in 1914, it became a strategic fortress. Lloyd George and his advisors made a genius move born of pure desperation. They didn't just keep the banks closed on Monday. They issued a royal proclamation extending the bank holiday by 3 additional days: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. They effectively paused the British economy. They turned off the heartbeat of global trade to buy themselves the one thing they didn't have: time to think. Inside those secret meetings, the debate was fierce. The old guard bankers wanted to save the gold standard at any cost. They argued that if Britain stopped paying out gold, its reputation would be ruined forever. But the pragmatists, led by Lloyd George, looked at the ledgers and realized the old guard was dreaming. If the doors opened on Friday and the gold run continued, the Bank of England would be empty by noon. They needed a plan B. They needed a way to give the people money that wasn't gold, but they had to do it in a way that didn't spark a revolution. Enter John Bradbury. Bradbury was a high-ranking civil servant, a man whose name is largely forgotten by history, but whose signature would soon be in every pocket in the British Isles. The government realized they couldn't print traditional banknotes fast enough. The Bank of England's printing process was too slow and too ornate. So they did something radical. They decided to bypass the Bank of England entirely. The Treasury decided to print its own emergency notes. But they had a problem. They didn't have any banknote paper. In a move of peak wartime improvisation, they went to the only place that had massive rolls of high-quality, watermarked paper ready to go: the contractors who printed postage stamps. These new notes, the 10-shilling and £1 Bradburys, were tiny. They were printed on paper usually reserved for the head of King George V to be licked and stuck on an envelope. They looked flimsy. They looked like play money. They didn't have the gravitas of a heavy gold coin or the large flowing script of a traditional Bank of England note. On that long, sweating weekend, the printing presses ran 24 hours a day. Millions of these postage stamp pounds were churned out and packed into crates. The plan was a massive gamble. On Friday morning, when the bank holiday finally ended, the tellers wouldn't be handing out gold. They would be handing out these slips of paper. The government was essentially betting the entire future of the British Empire on a single question. Would a Londoner, terrified by the prospect of a world war, accept a piece of stamp paper as a substitute for gold? If the answer was no, the economy would collapse into barter and riots. If the answer was yes, then the very nature of money would be changed forever. As the crates of Bradburys were rushed to bank branches across the country under armed guard, the leaders of Britain held their breath. The trust machine had been dismantled and replaced with a hope machine. Now, they just had to wait for the doors to open. Chapter 4. The Psychology of Fake Money. Friday, August 7th, 1914. The extended holiday was over. The steel shutters of the banks in the City of London ground upward, and the moment of truth arrived. The air was thick with tension. Thousands of people who had spent the last 4 days watching the headlines of war rushed to the streets, surged toward the counters. They expected a fight. They expected to be told the cupboards were bare. Instead, they were met with something far more unsettling. Polite calm and a sea of small, strange red and black slips of paper. This was the great gamble of the Bradbury Pound. When the customers reached the teller windows and asked for their money, the tellers didn't flinch. They reached for the stacks of postage stamp-sized paper and began counting. "The king's gold is being kept for the war," the narrative went. "But here is the king's credit." The room stayed quiet. There were no riots. There was no looting. To the shock of the Treasury officials watching from their windows, the public simply accepted it. But why? Why did a population that had been raised on the absolute truth of gold suddenly agree to trade their lives and labor for scraps of paper printed by a stamp company? The answer lies in a masterclass of wartime psychology. The government didn't frame the Bradbury as a sign of bankruptcy. They framed it as an act of patriotism. Posters began to appear across London with a simple message: to use gold instead of paper is to help the enemy. Taking gold out of the Bank of England was reimagined as a betrayal of the boys in the trenches. If you insisted on carrying sovereigns, you were draining the empire's lifeblood. By accepting the paper, you were a hero of the home front. It was a brilliant move because it turned a financial failure into a moral victory. But beyond the propaganda, there was the cold, hard reality of necessity. People needed to buy bread. They needed to pay rent. In a functioning society, you don't need money to be real. You just need it to be accepted. As soon as the local grocer and the landlord agreed to take the Bradbury Pound, the plan was complete. The trust machine had been hot-wired. This was the birth of what economists call fiat money. Money that has value not because it is made of something precious, but because the government says it does, and the people believe them. Up until that Friday morning, money was a commodity. After that morning, money became a social contract. Britain had effectively moved from a system of physical accounting to a system of mass hallucination. And it worked. The gold remained in the vaults, tucked away to pay for American steel and Canadian wheat, while the British public went about their lives using fake money. The psychological barrier had been broken. The gold standard was technically still the law of the land. You were still supposed to be able to get your gold. But the government had successfully made it socially impossible to ask for it. The genie was out of the bottle. For the first time, a major global power had realized that as long as you have the trust of the people and the power of the printing press, you don't actually need the gold. But this change came with a price. The anchor had been cut, and the ship was now drifting into a new, uncharted ocean where value was no longer fixed by the weight of a coin, but by the whims of politics and the shifting winds of the national mood. Chapter 5. The Aftermath and the Scars. The Bradbury Pound was supposed to be a temporary fix, a wartime emergency measure that would be tucked away once the Great War was won. But history has a way of turning temporary solutions into permanent norms. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, the world Britain returned to was unrecognizable. The old coat check system was broken. The crates of gold that once sloshed across the Atlantic had largely moved in one direction, toward the United States, leaving the British treasury hollowed out by the staggering cost of victory. In 1925, a young and ambitious Chancellor of the Exchequer named Winston Churchill tried to force the genie back into the bottle. In a move of immense national pride, he returned Britain to the gold standard. He wanted to prove that the pound was still as good as gold, hoping to restore the glory of the Victorian era. But it was a disaster. By tying the currency back to gold, Britain made its exports too expensive and its debt too heavy. The economy choked. The magic of 1914 couldn't be recreated because the world had already tasted the freedom of the printing press. In 1931, amidst the Great Depression, Britain abandoned gold for the final time. The Bradbury way, the way of trust, paper, and government decree, had won. This brings us to the modern world. When you look at the financial headlines today, when central banks print trillions of dollars to stop a pandemic crash, or lower interest rates to save a housing market, you are seeing the ghost of July 1914. The trust machine we live in today was built on that frantic August bank holiday. We have traded the heavy, cold certainty of gold for a world of digital pixels and paper receipts. The irony is that we still use the language of the old world. We talk about saving and value as if there is something physical backing it all up. We still treat gold as the ultimate safety net when the stock market wobbles. But the reality is that we've lived in a Bradbury world for over a century. Our entire global civilization is now a shared story, a collective agreement that the paper in our wallets and the numbers on our screens have value because we all decide they do. Conclusion: the ghost in the machine. Money is nothing more than a shared story. It is a narrative we tell each other so we can work together, trade across borders, and build a future. For centuries, that story was about a yellow metal pulled from the earth. But in 1914, the story changed overnight. We learned that the trust machine doesn't actually need gold to run. It just needs us to keep believing in the machine. We watched as the most stable financial system in history vanished in a single weekend, replaced by postage stamp paper and a plea for patriotism. It leaves us with a haunting question as we look at our own modern era of crypto, inflation, and digital banking. If the world's most powerful empire could rewrite the rules of reality in just 72 hours to keep from vanishing, what does that say about the money in your pocket today? How much of your wealth is real, and how much is just a story we've all agreed not to stop telling? The gold died in 1914, but the ghost of that trust is the only thing keeping the world turning today. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. And while at it, check out our other fascinating videos.